sort of a blurring of those two sort of words, because you see the graphic elements even in her textile works. More later.
Part 2 coming up. Louise?
I think it's absolutely impossible to separate the two, because we're looking at it from a design point of view. You're led by a client brief. However, when we're providing art for that, we're also led by that brief. So we've got to find artwork and create artwork that works in tangent with what you're doing. It's different when you go to an exhibition, you see something that's a standalone piece that you're buying purely because you absolutely love it. But when you're providing artwork to go within a scheme, whatever that may be, we have to work together on it. You know, we can't put something absolutely crazy that does not either work with or complement the space. So I think they actually work incredibly closely together, and to differentiate is incredibly difficult.
That's why you're here. You said you're going to take more than 2 minutes. Go on. Come on, Khaled.
Personally, I think the one who could answer this question are the artists and the designers who just raised their hands. Because I think we are talking about here the practitioner, the one who is practicing art and design. Is not from an outsider's point of view. Because as an outsider, as a client, doing whatever practice is, I think we look at things there's always an aesthetic, or there's a beauty in an object or in an art piece that we look at, and sometimes we define an object by being, oh, that's an art piece. A chair could be an art piece, because that's how we look at it. But if we ask the designer and the artist about their process, the way where they start from, where they come, what stages they pass through, we will understand the differences. I usually come in such debates, and I usually say, no, there is a difference. I don't agree on the blurry line, but I think it's in the process, which is not very obvious to the outsiders or to the viewers. It's only the designer knows how he go through a brief to create something, and then through the artist as well, how he go through that stage of expression to create an artwork. Definition, yes, I would say I would define art or artist as being an expression of self, space, incident, where design, I always believe they are solutions, and they usually either to enhance something or to solve a problem or to just better life in a way. But I think, yes, the answers will be with designers and artists, and they have to answer that.
Okay. Now with you guys, as art consultants, when you have clients, I mean, how do you get your clients to trust in your judgment for their art needs, for their hotels, for their buildings? I mean, you've obviously got you find the artists, you find the artwork. Now, they say, for instance, a client will come to you and say, I would like 5 pieces of art for my big walls. Yeah. How do you then go and find the parts, find the art that they need?
You've got to remember, we're coming from a very commercial space. So whereas perhaps you're creating artwork to sell to an end user, we exactly that. The client will come to us, and there's a couple of factors. A hotel lobby, budget. What's the message? Are we trying to put a story throughout the whole hotel? And are we looking at the designers of what they've designed, and are we then building a story around that through the artwork? So does the artwork give a message? But it is fundamentally controlled by the budget. And then we try and find artists, we try very hard to find artists locally based to then commission them to do something for that space.
But when you commission an artist to do something, you have constraints. You have color schemes, you have size constraints. If it's a sculpture piece, again, it has to fit in within the remit from your client. How do you find that the artists deal with that? Because it's supposed to be a blank canvas for them, and they create art. When you're giving them a lot of constraints, surely then they're designing something to go on the wall.
Well, I think there are two types of artists in that aspect. For example, us as interior designers, whether, for example, when we're working on a hospitality project, then we approach art consultants. If, for example, it's a residential project that we know the client is looking for something special, then we would speak to not an art consultancy agency, but just to an artist and approach him for him to come up with a standalone piece, something that has a message, that has some symbolic value for the client, that the client can relate to because he's going to be the end user. But when it comes to hospitality and commercial projects, the first constraint is budget. Unfortunately, the clients, they don't allow us, even the designers, that lump sum for art. So we control everything from the beginning. We show them the furniture, the fabrics, the curtains, carpets, and unfortunately, a lot of times art comes as an afterthought. Okay, now we need accessories and art, and it's put in the same bag. Now you designer go and find artists for this, and then we have to try to find art consultancy agents which are commercially viable and who can work with solutions within the budget and fit with our color scheme and all our other constraints, and we will be interfering and I don't call it interfering, working together a lot to achieve that purpose. Because when we start with the clients, we show these 3Ds, amazing 3Ds where everything's coordinated, and we ourselves, we introduce art concepts as well. So then the client's expectations is that someone will follow that concept. So we are sort of dictating the art in that aspect.
And what do you do when the client looks at your 3D render and says, yeah, that's great, yeah, I want that piece of art?
Unfortunately, it's happened before, yes. And I would like to blame it a lot on Pinterest and all forms that we have. Not only that, and our tight time frames, because we can't show a 3D visual with blank walls. We have to fill it in the same way we put other accessories, we show it with artwork. And that's in our head, it's something conceptual. We try to save ourselves telling the client this was just conceptual. Or a lot of times it's based on some artist's work, and then we take inspiration for that, and then we tell the client, then we'll approach that artist. Unfortunately, a lot of the times then we approach the artist and the client doesn't have the budget for it. But if it was from the beginning, I don't think a lot of the artists will be able to, without being commissioned, doing a 3D or a render or wasting, let's say, their time to do a proposal without knowing if they'll be commissioned or not. So it's tricky sometimes, yes.
Quite often, though, you can find an image. We have this with Pinterest all the time. It drives me mad. So you'll get a Pinterest image, and we will then look at our database of artists to see who's got a similar style. Can we create something that's commercially viable, the client can afford it, and it works within the scheme? We often get specifications where a designer has put a big wall sculpture in a hotel room, and my background tells me that in a hotel room, I know roughly what the budget is for an artwork. They're not going to be able to afford a metal sculpture on the wall, or it's not practical, kids jumping on a bed, take an eye out, there's all sorts of things. So then we advise the client and say, look, this is where we think you should go.
So Roland, how would you feel about if you've got someone coming to you to commission a piece, but they give you a lot of restrictions? Do you feel that you're sort of like bound?
Because artists and designers are always the end point of everything. We're like the end of the long process from hiring an architect to interior designer, and then it falls to commissioning a designer, and that's us. And always it falls down to the budget. All right, hey Roland, I have like 5,000 dirhams. Would you like to design my wall? And I said, what would you like to do in the 5,000 dirhams budget? That's like my materials only, come on. It's like, hey, so you have to fix like this. I think people who are commissioning has to kind of identify the people who they're working with, like really to strength, and have to have like a very close relationship with these people, or else they would end up like paying only like designers which they don't know and they don't have any connection, and it feels so impersonal. The output is horrendous, and that is like what's happening. And we're like in the end point. I think there has to be like a strong point of people commissioning art or design, so as I may say.
Well, on that point, how do you manage to maintain artistic integrity on projects when you're heavily restricted by budget? And to the guys that sort of like supply the art and find the artist to the end user, do you ever have to go back and try and squeeze 5 pennies more from your man to get that piece of art? I mean, you're negotiators, aren't you, really? Yeah. You have to negotiate, and the artist will say, oh, you're nailing me down on price, and the other guy's saying, I don't want to give you that much anyway. So how do you feel about that?
You've got to remember that if you, we often talk to, especially young artists, so they might have done one exhibition, some of them have never exhibited before, it's just a hobby they paint, and they're actually very, very good. So they're trying to sell their work. Now, if you can sell a piece of work to myself that may put it in the St. Regis, we had this with the St. Regis.